It was around 2 a.m., halfway through a grueling night shift. I was at the old abandoned state hospital, a great place to catch up on reports or Netflix. There's a big empty parking lot to sit in with plenty of streetlights. There's also a very predictable urban legend surrounding the place. So it's a pretty safe bet that I won't be bothered by some overly friendly citizen or angsty teenager with a cell phone camera. So I'm typing up this report from a domestic I'd handled earlier, FM radio droning in the background. All of a sudden, my handheld police radio lets out this deafening crack. I swear I just about hit my head on the roof of the car, I jumped so badly. It sounded like a goddamn gunshot, it was so loud. I checked the volume knob. Low. I'm not a jumpy guy, but that scared the shit out of me. My heart was absolutely hammering in my chest, blood pounding away at my eardrums. I got out of the car to stretch my legs and calm down a little bit, laughing at my own foolishness. It started to rain, a soft but cold drizzle. Fog had begun to settle outside the parking lot, blanketing the huge yard surrounding the hospital. I cast an angry glance at the radio. Budget cuts had been killing police departments all over the country. A small, arguably insignificant rural benefit like mine has gotten slammed. We switched over to some of the cheapest police radios money can buy just to be able to keep our 2 cruisers serviced. I figured that crack I'd heard was some kind of a glitch. I pressed the rubber talk button with my thumb, bringing the piece of junk close to my lips. "County, how do you read this unit?"
"Loud and clear, 107.
A woman's strained voice replied, a slight rasp to the words.
"How do you read me?"
I almost dropped the radio. Tom's the only one working county dispatch tonight. Their only female employee got caught lying, some kind of bogus sexual harassment complaint, and they canned her about 2 months ago. My hands were trembling slightly as I brought the radio back up to my mouth. 107 to county?
"Go ahead, 107.
Tom sounded as though I'd just woke him up from a nap. "Tom, is it just you at the comm center tonight?"
"Yeah, 10:04, just me."
He sounded confused, and rightfully so. Another earth-shattering crack made me actually drop it into the cold pavement this time. It wasn't just the noise. I felt something. It was almost like a really low electric shock that had my fingers tingling. The radio somehow didn't break when it clattered to the ground. I wish it would have. I was suddenly and acutely aware that I was being watched. You pick up on things like that after you've been on the job long enough. I didn't remember unholstering my pistol, yet its comforting weight rested in my hand nonetheless. I scanned the impenetrable foggy blackness as my hair dampened under an increasingly steady rain. I couldn't see a thing. That's when I looked up, and my heart stopped beating in my chest. A distant flicker of white light. I walked up to the edge of the lot, just on the outskirts of the protective orange street lamps, squinting up at the small orb. At the very top floor of the abandoned asylum, one window glowed ominously. There was a light on in that room.
107?
My eyes snapped toward her silky voice, trailing from the forgotten radio still lying on the ground next to my car. I glanced back up toward that window, now as dark as the 1,000 other windows that stared down at me from that sinister building. Awkward trembling fingers clicked the radio off, the glowing LED screen blinking out. I tried to figure out which window I'd seen, or that I'd seen that had been lit up.
107. Come in, 107.
The chilling voice was now laced with something. I'd had enough. Dirt and gravel kicked up into the night sky as I peeled out of the parking lot and away from that damnable building. I didn't go back. I haven't told anyone about what happened. The last thing I need is a mandated mental health evaluation. And before you bitch at me for not checking the place for a possible burglar, there's nothing in there to steal. Thieves have gutted the place of copper piping years ago. It's just an old rotting mansion with nothing worth even looking at inside. I need a clean head if I'm going to approach whatever this is. And last night was not the night. I'm off for the next few days. If I can muster up the courage or insanity, I might try to investigate further when I'm back. We've used the building for training before. Mock hostage scenarios and stuff like that. So I've got a pretty good feel for the building layout. I can picture the general area where I'd seen that light, or thought I saw that light. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. I don't know what to think. Death came to me that night as I sat numbly in a puddle of my own desperate blood and tears. And when I saw him, a tall entity clothed in a robe so black it reached past the depths of darkness I felt inside my heart. I'd been upset, not about one thing in particular, but multiple things. I'd made so many mistakes that trying to put myself back together had become harder than reassembling a broken eggshell. A year earlier, I'd lost the most important person in my life, the only girl I truly loved, Penny. I could only blame myself. I'd spent the past year blaming myself for betraying her trust. She'd found a new guy, a better guy than I am. One that brought her flowers, took her out on fancy dates, was loyal to her. And all of that reminded me of how many chances I used to have to do all those things for her. 6 months earlier, the guilt and pain got to me, tore at my soul, and to numb the pain, I took sleeping pills with alcohol every night, dreading the moment I'd wake up to another sunny, lonely day. 4 months earlier, I lost my job and my scholarship because the depression and substance abuse kept me rooted to the spot. I didn't want to face a world where I'd have to watch everyone else swim, and I'm slowly sinking. 3 months earlier, I lost my friends and family as well. I'd become distant and emotionless. I turned down invites, didn't show up for holiday get-togethers, blew up on anyone who told me I needed help. I was in chaos, and I could only blame myself. 1 month earlier, I'd bought the small rectangular case of razors, adding self-abuse to the substance abuse. I'd feel the smallest release when I felt the sharp sting and saw the deep red flow down my wrist. And that night, I called my ex-girlfriend, slightly tipsy but truthful all the same. I told her I loved her. I begged for another chance. I cried harder than I'd cried in months just at the sound of hearing her voice. She told me one thing, and one thing only. I don't love you anymore, Calvin, and I never will. She hung up the phone immediately after, and all I could do was stare blankly at the corner of the room. But as everything hit me at once, it hit me harder than a car going full speed. I didn't hesitate. I swallowed the rest of my sleeping pills, gulped down the remaining vodka straight from the bottle, and I used those razors to cut deeper than I'd ever cut before. So here I sat, hopeless and alone. But I wasn't alone. I'd looked down at my bloody wrist for mere seconds, and when I looked back up, he was there. A normal person would have been hysterical and afraid, but I wasn't normal anymore. I wasn't surprised he was there. No, I welcomed it.
Calvin.
He spoke in the most baritone voice I'd ever heard, lower than the voiceovers on every movie preview, and he said that one word with a disapproving sigh. The way he said it made me feel like a kid again, as if I'd done something wrong and lied about it. But I wasn't lying now. The proof was in the mess that was myself at that moment. I sobbed, shakily. I'm sorry, I said. For whatever reason, I felt like I had to apologize, so I did.
You've spent a long time being sorry, Calvin, but not once did you say sorry to yourself.
A crease formed in between my eyebrows as I mulled over what he just said. It came to me slowly. He wanted me to see that my only enemy was myself. Do you give all of the souls you come across helpful advice? I thought you were deaf, not a psychologist. I raised an eyebrow at him, still unnerved by the fact that I was looking into an endless black hole where his face should be. He forced a deep, short laugh.
No, mostly just the ones like you that take into their own hands to decide fate. It's not up to you, Calvin.
So, you give advice to your suicide victims? What does that mean? He sighed again, as if he had explained this thousands of times before. I'm sure he had.
It means you don't get to decide this. It means I'm giving you another perspective.
I stood up, curiosity hanging on every word. What perspective would that be? The only way I see things is that I'm a horrible crap excuse for a human being. So why be afraid of dying when I'm more afraid to live? I had to do this. I needed to do this.
And I'm showing you, Calvin, what living can do for you.
A hint of persuasion sounded in his voice. Tell me, Death, what do I have to live for? The question came out harshly, but he didn't flinch.
Listen closely. What if I told you that you'd make it through this depression, not fully healed, but controlled by medication and therapy? What if I told you that because you'll overcome this depression, you'll get another job, and the job will pay for the education you dissed? When you're done with that education, you'll be admired by your friends, your family, and most importantly, your ex-girlfriend. They'll see the greatness in you that you know you have. They'll be proud of that change. You won't be able to look at the bottle of vodka without being sick. And what if I told you that your career will pay for the expensive ring you'll use to propose to your one and only? And you'll be able to give her all of the flowers and dates and loyalty you failed to give before. Most importantly, what if I told you you'd be able to give her a dream wedding as well, and give her 2 beautiful children, a girl and a boy? What if I told you you'd be missing out on life by choosing to give up?
Tears rimmed up in my eyes opaquely. I can be happy again? I asked hopefully, afraid of what the answer might be. But his answer was the biggest relief I'd ever felt.
Yes, you can be happy again.
I wiped my wet cheeks and cracked a trembling smile. I'd say I'd want to live.
Then I am no longer needed.
The finality in his voice diminished the tension I'd felt before. As I grinned wider, I let out a half cry, half chuckle. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Now, go to the hospital, get your stomach pumped, and seal up your wounds. Goodbye.
And in a flash, the black void that was him vanished. For days afterward, I couldn't get rid of that smile. The nurses and doctors that helped me were puzzled by it. A man being treated for a suicide attempt is this happy. I knew to them there was nothing right about it, but I hadn't felt more right in my whole life. Because of my obvious mental health issues, I stayed in the mental ward for a month after I healed physically. Just like Death said, I still had the memories of my depression, but it was nothing the therapy and medication couldn't fix. After I was released, I found a job at a call center that paid slightly more than minimum wage. It wasn't the best of jobs, but I was surely glad to have it. I saved money for a few months and started going to school again in the fall. I was working on a business degree. My friends and family were there to watch me graduate, and I'd never felt more thankful. Finally, I was making people proud again. I wasn't failing. I didn't even drink that night with the rest of my friends. I didn't want to touch another drop of alcohol. I spent that night with the people closest to me, all seated at a large table at the best restaurant in town. And I'm so glad I chose to do so that night, because our waitress happened to be the girl I missed so badly and still loved. She looked surprised to see me, but she also looked glad. "Calvin," she said, staring at me as if I were her long-lost twin. I wanted to smile too, but I noticed the faint purple under her right eye. It wasn't completely hidden by her beige foundation. She knew I noticed, and before I could say anything, she began taking our orders. Concerned, I told my family and friends as they were leaving that I was going to stay and speak to her. They understood, and after more congratulations, they departed. I waited another hour in the twilight-stained parking lot where I could breathe the fresh spring air. She was one of the first to come out after closing, and she noticed me propped next to the entrance, halting her stride. Penny's face lit up, and there were tears in her eyes. "I knew you'd wait for me, Cal. I know you're a great guy. I think I've always known you had potential, but I guess I was being my own worst enemy." Those words brought back the tiniest memory of what Death had told me months prior, that I should say sorry to myself, and she needed to do the same. The past is the past, Penny. No animosity. She looked more grateful then and reached to hug me. I put a hand on her cheek before she could and gently rubbed the purple under her eye. "Did he do this to you?" I asked, both concerned and pissed off. Penny didn't say a word, but her deep brown eyes said it all. He obviously was the accommodating boyfriend role and had started asking too much of her. But I would become everything she needed and more. I pulled her into a hug and ran my fingers through her hair. "It won't happen again, love. I'm here now." After that night, things were better than they'd ever been between me and Penny. She'd gotten away from her abusive boyfriend, and together, we got him the jail sentence he deserved. We'd spent every moment we had to spare with each other, and it was like we'd never even parted. Even our old inside jokes remained the same. With time, I'd saved enough money to buy her the most beautiful ring I could find, and I proposed to her right in the middle of the local high school football field where we'd met so many years ago. A field, maybe not the best setting for a proposal, but it meant so much to both of us. Flowers filled our house with fragrant smells. I brought home one every day after work. I made reservations every weekend for dates, and no girl could ever mean as much to me as my Penny. The wedding was the one she'd always dreamed of when we were younger. A winter wedding in the snow, everything adorned in blues and whites, and that long-sleeved dress she'd hoped for ever since she saw it in that store window. A year after the marriage, Penny came to me with the best news I'd ever received from her. She was pregnant. We found out it was a girl, and I was every bit the happy father when our Violet came into the world. Dark hair, just like her mother. 2 years later, we had our son, Jackson. He looked like me, with green eyes and a mop of chestnut hair. Violet was over the moon about having a younger sibling. Life was amazing. It was everything Death had told me it would be, And more, I chose life the last time I saw him, and life chose me. You can imagine my shock the day I found him standing in front of my work desk. I had been tapping away on my computer, focused on nothing but my work. He broke that trance. I became a statue, still as Lot's wife after she had turned to salt. After seconds of this vacant stare-off, I broke the stillness. Why? He sighed, much like he had in the night we'd met. That disapproving sigh, but now with a bit of apprehension.
Something has occurred, Calvin. Something bad.
My heart beat swiftly against my ribs. I stopped breathing. What do you mean bad? A million things raced through my head at once. My family, my friends, myself. Did something happen to them? Was something going to happen to me?
You remember Hale, don't you, Calvin?
Hale. The piece of crap I'd put in jail. I hated hearing his name. How could I forget that bastard? What about him? Did he finally get what was coming to him?
He got out of jail, Calvin.
The caution and pity in that one sentence couldn't have been good. I stood up from my office chair flustered. There's no way. He couldn't have gotten out yet. He received 15 years. It's only been 9.
Ever heard of good behavior, Calvin?
I was enraged. How could this monster be capable of good behavior? And then I remembered. He'd fooled Penny for a year. He had been a wolf in sheep's clothing. He was definitely capable of fooling others.
I think you need to come with me, Calvin.
I didn't waste any time. I followed him, not bothering to tell anyone I was leaving work. My first priority was to make sure the people I loved were okay. But the pieces that were being put together in my mind was anything but okay. I drove 90 all the way home. Beads of sweat had formed across my forehead, and my breathing was loudly audible. Death followed me into the house as I rushed inside, but he said nothing. The living room was a mess of broken vases, the ones which held all the flowers I'd given to Penny, and a million little petals and leaves littered the floor. I was so immensely angry and scared at the same time. Scared mostly. Because the scene in front of me hinted that nothing good could come from it. I screamed, terror in my voice. Penny! Violet! Jack! Where?
The master bedroom, Calvin.
Death said from somewhere in my peripheral. He pointed at the door at the end of the hallway, a door that was now chopped and broken, standing slightly ajar. I sprinted down the hallway and pushed past the door, not worrying about the sharp splinters that dug into my left hand. The light was off. I wish I hadn't turned it on, because when I did, I was met with sheer horror. Blood, crimson painted across the white carpet and bedsheets, on the walls, and painted on the bodies of the 3 people in my life that meant the most to me. The details are too dramatic to repeat, but the axe that had been used on all of them was left behind, embedded into my wife's skull. I fell to my knees in front of them, racking sobs so hard that I puked. I just couldn't stop crying. I couldn't speak. I was screaming under the weight of emotional pain. I was hurt. But you said it would be better. I turned to Death, screaming and seeing red. You said I'd be happy. Why? I sobbed deeply again, unable to contain the lump in my throat.
You were, Calvin. You were happy for several years, but with a life comes chances. Good ones and bad ones. Everyone suffers, Calvin.
Suffer? I have nothing to live for anymore, Death. I've lost my reasons for living, for working, for loving. That's more than suffering. I couldn't contain the contempt in my voice, and I got dangerously close to the black hole of face Death wore, despite having to look up to see it.
You were wrong again, Calvin. I'm not here only for your family, as I do have to do my job.
He lifted his bony hands in surrender.
But I'm also here for you.
What? You already know I'm planning to kill myself once again, psychologist. I spat at him, hot rage drenched in every word.
Actually, yes. I knew you'd try. You'll go get the pistol from the top shelf of your closet and blow your brains out. You'll do it in a few hours in this very room. But I have another perspective for you.
My mouth hung ajar. He knew my plans, knew where the pistol was that I kept for protection. But I couldn't be too surprised. After a moment, I crossed my arms and glared. Oh, another perspective for me, huh? What could possibly make me choose life this time? A life that isn't worth living. For the first and last time, Death laid a hand on my shoulder, and although I couldn't see his face, I knew he was looking me right in the eyes.
You must live, Calvin, because Hale must die. And you're the one who will make it happen.
I thought I heard his lips part into a smile, if he had lips. Death made it clear once again for me.
What do you say, Calvin?
I smiled then too. What must have appeared a sick, sinister grin, but a grin all the same. I'd say, I want to live. Blood boiled in my veins as I sat aloft my motorcycle right outside a rundown motel. It was a red and black 1999 Ducati I'd bought for a steal on Craigslist a few years back. I still question why I bought it in the first place. A need for danger, maybe. That certainly applied in my current situation. I'd set in motion my very dangerous plan hours earlier. Death, for the second time, departed from my presence, leaving a huff of blackened mist, slowly spiraling in the air to nothingness. I was not the same person I'd been the first time he'd met me. Definitely not now. Now that angry revenge coursed through me like upcoming bile, neither was I the same Calvin I'd grown into. The doting father, the loving husband, the clean-cut businessman, the role model. All that had been stripped away. But I'll be damned if I let that piece of shit who did so get away with satisfaction. This Calvin had a heart of ice and a mind of evil. With the same demented grin stretching ever more across my face, I stalked to the bedroom closet. There it was, in all its glory, the pistol, glinting off the little light the fading day could provide. I snatched it, eager as a leprechaun with a handful of gold. It was cool in my hand. It had been a long time since I'd even touched the thing. I bought it years before. Not long after, I bought the house that my family and I resided in. Coldness gripped my heart at the thought of them. My grin faded. I didn't want to turn back around and face the scene I'd walked in on. My only wish now is that I told my wife where I kept the weapon. It was hidden from the kids for obvious reasons. Now I'd regret that it was also hidden from my wife, due to my own forgetfulness. That regret, however, was redundant. It was too late to think of these things now. There were other problems at hand. I reached back up to the dusty shelf where the gun had lain, feeling around until my hand landed on the box. I snatched it, as well as bullets. More than I needed. Grabbing what little money was scattered atop the nightstand and stuffing it into my wallet. I tried painstakingly hard to leave the room without glancing back to the gore. But upon reaching the doorway, I stopped. A pull on my heart made it too difficult to just leave. Dead or alive, I couldn't forsake my own family without a proper goodbye. Slowly, as the sun was setting in that second, I turned on a heel. Never had I imagined it would end this way. I used to envision the longest, happiest life for myself. Partly because of the scenario death had once painted in my head, but also because, isn't that what everyone wants? to live a long, happy life. I'd have pictured Penny and I, graying and wrinkled, with that same loving look in our eyes that couldn't be marred with age. We'd have been old, but in our hearts, we'd still be young. In our memories, we'd still be on that football field in which we met, her in a purple and white uniform, waving palms in each hand and cheering my way as I scored a winning touchdown. It was fate that we locked arms for the post-game alma mater, swaying together among all the other players and cheerleaders who didn't notice the two of us blushing. I'd have pictured our children, Violet and Jackson. They wouldn't be children anymore by then. Maybe they'd even have a graying hair or two. They would visit often, bringing with them our grandchildren, who might have eagerly embraced us, or might have been too busy with their phones to do so. We'd have said, "Back in our day, the iPhone 3G was something else, I tell you." And they'd give us that blank look every teen might give to their senile grandparents, and continue tapping away at their 66S. The future played out in my mind so many times before. It made me laugh, cry, and smile. But it was not to be. My reality faded back into what it really was. That family I'd have lay broken and erased on the floor. Grudgingly, I swallowed the tears threatening to spill from my eyes. I knelt to the bloodied carpet and gave each of them one last kiss on the forehead. They were so cold. "I love you. Goodbye," I said, and I left the room. It took a few minutes to regain my composure, but once I did, I found myself with gun, bullets, and a wallet tucked in one arm, as I used the other to rifle through clean clothes in the laundry. On went a dark tee, jeans, and boots that didn't display spots of my family's blood. I was about to take my car keys from the hook on the wall, but spontaneously decided on the Ducatis. I took them from their resting place and said another goodbye to the place I called home, slamming the front door behind me. The garage was on the right side of the house. I made my way to it. Pulling up the heavy metal door, I scanned the inside. The bike was propped up in the back left corner, draped in a few questionable cobwebs. I dusted them off with my hands. I hope this thing still runs. I coughed as dust coated my throat. I guided it into the approaching night, pocketing what little belongings I'd bring into the black saddlebags. Lastly, I threw a leg over the side of the machine, sat back, and slipped on a helmet. I didn't care for safety anymore. That much was evident by the speed in which I took on the road in front of me. Lights and cars and people passing me by in a swift, bright blur. Sure, I didn't care if I died, but the smallest sliver of caution made me slow down, because this moment of living couldn't be wasted. And I also slowed down to search for one particular piece of scum. I looked for 15 minutes before coming to a gas station at the right side of the street. It was open, fluorescent lights flickering above an empty parking lot. Empty. Thank God. One more thing was to be done. Something I couldn't neglect. I drove my bike to a stop on the darker side of the lot. In front of me was a payphone. I shelled in a couple quarters. 911, what's your emergency? She requested. Yes, I'd like to make an anonymous report. Police are needed at 174 Pleasant Street. Make it soon. I'd responded monotonously, as if I were ordering pizza rather than reporting my family's murder. I hung up. I knew the implications that would be made once the cops arrived at the scene. They'd think I'd killed my own family and that I'd ran. I didn't care what they thought though, because what happened to them needed to be found out. My wife and kids deserved that much. I could only hope that they'd put pieces together like I had and consider Hale as a suspect. But he had a place in hell, not in jail. It seemed that in that small amount of time I'd been on the phone, a couple of cars had taken up residence on the bare lot. One, an SUV, hummed to life and drove past me. A middle-aged blonde woman sat in the driver's seat. A movie from an overhead DVD player shone in blinking colors across the faces of the two kids in the back seat. A pang erupted in my heart. I didn't allow it to stay, however. I shook away thoughts that plagued my mind and walked to the entrance of the store. With all the adrenaline I built up, I now needed to take a piss. The inside of the store was almost as gloomy as the outside had been. A wrinkled clerk with skin way too tanned and hair way too white sat behind the counter, shoveling popcorn into his gluttonous mouth, absorbed into the tiny television that sat in front of him. I cringed at his enormous laugh that sent wet chunks of popcorn flying out in front of him. Shaking my head, I began to scan past the racks of chips and candy for the restroom. I found it in the right-hand corner of the store, just in time for it to be vacant as I watched a head of black hair exit and bobble down one of the aisles. All the events that had happened in that day left no time for bathroom breaks, so I really had to go. I shut and locked the door and took to it. Closing my eyes in quiet relief, I heard the laughter of the clerk from outside the restroom. I stifled an eye roll at how loud and obnoxious that man was. Then came another sound. A voice. "It's been too long, Herbert. Thanks for the free cigs." My eyes widened. I knew that hick voice anywhere. The clerk's thick, burly voice resounded. "Hey, you too, H. Have a good night." H isn't going to have a good night, Herbert. I shook off and zipped, bounding through the door and past the rows of cheap shit, earning a foolhardy look from the greasy clerk. In a flash, I was out in the night again, catching two red tail lights beaming from the mouth of the parking lot. I sprinted faster than I had the night I'd scored that winning touchdown, launching myself onto the motorcycle and shielding myself behind the masquerade of a helmet. He'd already started driving down the road, but my bike was fast enough to catch up within minutes. I kept my distance, trying to be as unassuming as possible. With what little light the bike provided, I could see the tag on the back of the car. It was a handicap tag. That didn't waver my certainty that I had the right guy. It just pissed me off even more. I knew he stole it. As I turned corners, the glimpse of that broken, gaping hole of a driver's side window and the illumination of his profile by streetlight confirmed it. Just like an unforgiving sack of shit to steal from the handicapped. Red-hot hatred heated my body, colliding with the cool wind that brushed past me. I gripped the handle so hard my knuckles turned white. My teeth grinded into a doomful smirk, eyes fixed straight ahead. Rock music drifted out of his open window, tainted by his boorishly awful singing voice. "Are you ready? Are you ready for this? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat?" Yes, I am Hale, but are you ready? He took another turn, off an exit ramp. A Motel 6 came into view and he swerved carelessly into the parking lot. I turned off my headlight. Out of the doorway the bullets ripped to the sound of the beat. By now he was sapping his fingers on the steering wheel like a moron, and I was still unnoticed. He parked in front of a room and turned the car off. I watched a few spaces away as he produced a key and slid it into the lock. And another one gone, and another one gone, another one bites the dust. His wailing faded as he entered the room and shut the door. Bullets loaded, I stood up and made the walk to that room, leaving my helmet behind. No more hiding my face. I wanted him to realize what a mistake he had made. Smiling, I tapped twice on the green metal door. I heard him groan from the other side. "It's too light for this He froze when he caught sight of me. I took that solitary moment like a grain of sand. Hey, I'm gonna get you too. The gunshot interrupted the silence of the night and bounded into his chest at full speed. I made sure to aim at the heart. He deserved a broken one anyway. He fell into a heap at my feet, a puddle of dark maroon spilling beneath, and I was still smiling. He looked up at me with no guilt in his pained eyes. His lips trembled and his eyes glazed in pity for himself. When the life finally faded from his conscience, I was startled by a hand on my shoulder. I zipped around, sure it was the motel manager, catching me red-handed. As you guessed, it was Death.
Good work, Calvin. I knew you had it in you.
You coaching now, psychologist? I asked, tension released at seeing a familiar face. Well, a familiar black void.
Ho ho ho. You could say that. I've been coaching you this whole time, Calvin.
He gripped tighter on my shoulder with his bony hand. Confused, I raised an inquisitive eyebrow. What do you mean by that?
I'm Death, Calvin. You don't really think I convince every soul to live each time I'm called, do you? What's what I get out of that?
Tension hit me again like a splash of freezing water. Why me? This makes no sense.
I needed someone with the pain, the commitment, the passion, and the vengeance that you have, Calvin. So here's a perspective.
No, I'm done with perspectives. I'm done with this. If I live, I'm going to prison for the rest of my worthless life. There's nothing left, Death. I gripped the cold metal in my hand so hard it started to shake.
So what are you saying, Calvin?
Question dripping in his grave voice. I say I want to die. I lifted the metal in an instant and pulled the trigger. Death didn't try to stop me. He watched as I fell to the ground from the savage force. I should have been dead, but as I lay on the rough sidewalk, I stared clearly at the starry night sky and Death's hulking figure looming over me. I felt stupid, like I was living out one of those depressing moments in comedy movies that are broken by a laughable joke. What the hell? Death offered his bony hand to me, black robes shifting his movement. I couldn't lay here like an idiot forever, so I took it. He pulled me to stand in front of him again, and I reached my free hand to the spot where the bullet had entered my skull. It was already scabbed over. I told you, I choose to die, dude, I yelled in disappointment.
Yes, Calvin, you choose death, and death chooses you.
He clutched my hand in an iron grip of finality and shook. I opened my mouth to speak. But before I could, Death wrapped white phalanges around the hood of his robe and pulled back. In front of me was myself. I blinked hard a couple times, unaware of what I was seeing. After the second blink, I opened my eyes. In front of me was a green metal door, open, with a sick, twisted man lying in his own blood. I kicked him with one of my bony feet. You're going to hell. Anybody that's ever worked in healthcare has tons of horror stories to tell about creepy happenings or disturbed patients. The most disturbing one I've ever witnessed was sending an elderly schizophrenic woman out to the hospital after she self-mutilated her genitals with a pair of scissors and wedged a tennis ball in the same place. Anyway, I was working third shift last night at the nursing home I recently started at. The nurses and I were swapping our horror stories when an older person, been practicing for 40 or so years, told us that she had the story to top all stories. Then, she asked us if we had strong stomachs. We laughed, thinking it was a story about poop or vomit, or it's some other small-time thing we dealt with every day. So, she started the story. 4 or 5 years ago, there was an elderly black woman admitted to our nursing home with steadily declining dementia. She freaked out all the aides. They all felt like something was wrong with her, and they were all afraid she might try to hurt them, even though she'd never gotten violent. The nurse said it was something in her stare. She looked at you like she wanted to eat you, was her exact quote. For a while, she seemed to just be an intense old lady with dementia. Then one night on third shift, around 5 a.m., the nurse was starting her 6 o'clock meds when she had the sudden feeling she should go check on this patient in particular before she started. She walked into her room to find her mouth, chest, and bed all completely covered in blood. With her hand in her mouth, the nurse called in the aide, and they began to mop up the blood so the nurse could find out where she was bleeding from. She assumed the woman had bitten her tongue or cheek or something, and had put her hand in her mouth because it hurt. Once they mopped up the blood, the nurse couldn't tell where the blood was coming from because the woman still hadn't moved her hand. She and the aide, it took both of them, started to pry the woman's hand from her mouth, but it wasn't moving. They started again, more slowly, and then it gave, and they were able to pull it from her mouth. What the nurse found was a hand with 3 bloody stubs where her fingers should have been. She looked back at the patient, who just continued to stare at her with the same intense stare while crunching on her own fingers. She'd bitten clean through the bone, and she showed absolutely no signs of pain. Then, the nurse heard her swallow it. That woman self-cannibalized her own fingers. I've never been told a healthcare horror story that has kept me from sleeping, but here it is. I'm so deeply disturbed that sleep is nowhere near an option, and I feel mildly anxious to just sit by myself. The absolute lack of human behavior, emotion, or sensation in that story absolutely terrifies me.